everywhere on social media at Keaton D. Nichols. That's at Keaton D. Nichols. You can follow us for a lot more content. And make sure, of course, you're checking out our YouTube page. We now have a Mixer page, and we're also streaming live from Twitter as well. Leave all that information in the comment section so that you all can find that for next time. And make sure you subscribe. Happy Friday to everyone out there. And most importantly, happy Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth to everyone out there. And I do mean everyone. A lot of people this year and newly this year sort of finding out, if you will, about Juneteenth and the sort of celebration that goes around Juneteenth, why a lot of African Americans in the country celebrate Juneteenth or recognize Juneteenth. It's become a big topic of conversation over the last couple of days and certainly on today as well. You see a lot of people on social media posting, a lot of people coming to the realization that, hey, I didn't know this was a thing before. And, personally, I'm okay with people learning things that they should have learned long ago. There's nothing that we can do to get back that time, but there is something that you can do, of course, now. And that's read up and study on exactly what Juneteenth is and why it's significant, rather, not just to African Americans, but to understanding what the entire country, what all of the United States is really about, and all of our history is really about. I'm a big history buff myself. I think that American history is probably the most interesting history for me to study myself. It's full of contradictions, and I think it tries at times to label African Americans or the history that African Americans are a part of sort of as a separate history. And I think that that's kind of an intentional thing. And I think one of the things that we can do, especially in this moment, to make ourselves more aware of exactly what's going on in the country, is to familiarize ourselves with the Juneteenth holiday. This is important. However, I understand, though, why the United States has struggled with this concept for so long of adopting this as a holiday or as a commemoration that they would like to recognize. I think there's a couple of reasons why that happens. The Emancipation Proclamation, of course, is the sort of thing, the document, if you will, that a lot of people understood, to free the slaves, to free Black Americans to be Americans just like everyone else. And for many people who have studied hard in school and who have aced all their history classes still believe this, because in many instances, that's simply what they were taught. And, Emancipation Proclamation comes down. Abraham Lincoln takes out a big pair of bolt cutters and just chops off the last remnant of chattel, slavery here in the United States. It's not how it happened. And as usual, the story behind what actually happened is a lot more complex than that. It took a lot longer to happen than that. However, if we acknowledge Juneteenth, right, and what happened, or if we acknowledge the events behind Juneteenth, then in effect we're kind of saying that this piece of American history that a lot of Americans, conservative or not, love to cling on to, the idea that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, it was something that was wrong that was going on here in the United States, and one courageous and ambitious leader, with the stroke of his pen, and the winning of the Civil War kind of helped too, but with all of that effectively ended slavery in the United States. We were on a path to equality from that point on, if indeed you listen to a lot of our history books. A lot of our history books that don't include a celebration like Juneteenth for this very reason. So it erodes a precious piece of American history. That's the first thing. The second thing I think that it does is it sort of makes the American Independence Day that we are used to celebrating as a country, July the 4th, American Independence Day, it loses a lot of its value. If we acknowledge that, there's a holiday that happened over 100 years later after the original celebration of Independence Day, in which now we can start having a conversation about all Americans being free, because at that point, it somewhat looked like that. Now, of course, again, the history is much more complicated than that. We know that Black Americans weren't free, that there's a lot of institutions and things that happened after that period of time, even leading up into this very day, that we consider to be roadblocks in ensuring that everyone is equal and free. But how can you celebrate American Independence Day on the 4th of July, something that encourages all Americans of every background and of every color to celebrate their country and how great their country is? How can we celebrate how great the country is when we didn't even free all the slaves when we said that we did as a country? I think celebrating Juneteenth brings out some of these awkward and sort of uncomfortable sort of conversations about where we live, the country that we call home, the country that oftentimes we, as especially as African Americans, are sort of coerced and forced into loving. It's a very complex history, and I don't think that even we as African Americans can fully love and celebrate this country for what it is until the country acknowledges exactly what it is. It's not the land of the free and the home of the brave and all these other American buzzwords that we've been hearing for years and years and years. A lot of Americans are just waking up to that in the last month and a half, or at least acknowledging that they're waking up to that in the last month and a half. So we've obviously got a long way to go. However, I do like the idea that people are coming to this realization now, because we can at least begin to have some conversations about affecting real change. Some of the change that's come this year from companies and commercials and even from some candidates and things like that have really just scratched the surface about digging into what Juneteenth really means here in America. But it is a start. It absolutely is a start. And I think a part of the process of us changing the systems that we have now and taking advantage of this moment when we have an opportunity to do so is doing stuff like this, acknowledging that a part of American history, there's a part of American history, there are significant parts, let me put it that way, of American history that are quite dark and disturbing. And that it doesn't quite fit with the narrative that we'd like to push and play, that America has always been this place that has been so welcoming for all of its citizens. I think ignoring some of those past maladies prevents us from being able to move on into an era of progress that we are pushing for right now. So even if you are new, even if you weren't necessarily very familiar with the Juneteenth holiday before this year or before today, get familiar with it. Understand how this is not just a part of Black history, it's a part of American history. And if you are American, this is inseparably a part of the history that you have to claim as well. I think a lot of the same people that are having trouble understanding and acknowledging this holiday are a lot of the same people that would like to view America in their own narrow and limited view. And that narrow and limited view is what we're asking a lot of people, what we have been asking a lot of people in the last month and a half or so to reevaluate. Not necessarily how many times you use the N-word in a month, but think about what your role is in all of this and what the role of the country has been in all of this. What does it all mean? It means something very different to an African American, especially when you consider Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth to everybody out there. I hope everyone enjoyed it safely today. And if you got plans for the rest of the weekend, I hope those plans are slamming and that you do so in a safe way. Not necessarily a story tonight on a Nichols Worth, but it is worth noting that more than 118,000 people have died from the coronavirus here in the United States. Those are the reported numbers that we have thus far. And for those keeping track, that's a lot of people. A lot of people. There may be a lot of institutions that are kind of glossing that very unfortunate fact and that very untimely fact, but it absolutely is true. And so we all need to continue to be safe, making sure we're monitoring our behavior and ensuring that we're not doing anything to spread this virus any further than it has already spread. All right, so into some political news for the day. Of course, today we got word that Senator Amy Kloubachar, Minnesota senator, announced late Thursday, according to the New York Times, that she was withdrawing from consideration to be the running mate to former Vice President Joseph Biden on the Democratic ticket. Ms. Kloubachar, who ran for president herself, she said during an MSNBC interview late yesterday that she called Mr. Biden on Wednesday night and told him that he should choose a woman of color to be his running mate. This was an interesting piece of news for me, somebody who's always considered Amy Kloubachar to be like a type of candidate for vice president. Not bad, not great either. And within the entire context of this race, we of course know that there's going to be a lot of people that are voting for Joe Biden, holding their nose, so to speak, and voting for Joe Biden anyway. So there's not really a whole lot of dramatic picks that Joe Biden could have for vice president at this point that would sort of upset the notion or the narrative behind this election, which is if you're a super Trump fan, you're probably going to vote for Trump. If you're sick of what Trump has done, then you're probably going to vote for Biden. If you weren't going to vote in the first place, then you probably aren't going to vote now. That's just the reality behind that. But anyway, Senator Amy Kloubachar making this announcement Thursday was something that fits into something we've been talking about this week on a Nichols Worth. It being politically advantageous for her to do so. Right. This comes at an interesting moment when I think many of us had sort of pushed Amy Kloubachar out of the possibility of impressive VP candidates long ago. Then we have the situation in Minnesota happening with George Floyd, and it highlighted her previous time as a prosecutor there in Minneapolis and the things more so that she didn't do to really reinforce that idea that she's going to be a candidate of the people, not just some of the people, but all of the people. So Amy Kloubachar was kind of under fire long before she long before she did this interview with MSNBC, and certainly long before she says that she called called the former vice president and said, "Hey, Joe, I don't know if you know this or not, but you should totally pick a woman of color since I'm dropping out in this particular situation." I'm not really sure how politically courageous of a move that this was given the circumstances. Like, if you endorse the idea of a black woman now, what previously might have held you from that position before? Obviously, she was running for president. When she was running for president, I can understand then. But as she became someone who a lot of Joe Biden's donors and supporters and things like that were sort of buzzing about, if you will, as she became that sort of favorite, the idea that a black woman should be in that position and not her never really seemed to come up. While Joe Biden himself and maybe some of those that were around him might have pushed the idea or might have promoted the idea in some way, shape, or form, it certainly didn't come from one Amy Kloubachar. But now that it is politically advantageous for Amy Kloubachar to say, yeah, black women, go, she does it. I think that's something that's become very disappointing for the Democrats, and not just Democrats, but I think really all politicians in a sense, especially those on a federal level, is that it's constantly a re-election bid, or it's constantly the things that take up their time, the things that they would like to show us that they're doing as representatives, oftentimes just goes back to the idea of getting re-elected. And that's very weak to me, right? If Amy Kloubachar supports black women being in high positions of politics, then she should have said that, and not just before now, rather, and not just Amy Kloubachar, by the way, but others as well. I'm talking about men. If they're going to be so gung ho about this idea, especially likely Democratic voters who call themselves men as well, then this should have been an idea that we're pushing long before it becomes politically advantageous to do so. Because if we do it after the window of political opportunity opens up, then who knows? This could just be something that raises Kloubachar's profile, raises the Democratic Party's profile. Certainly something we know that's raising Joe Biden's profile. And I think that this position ought to be taken a lot more seriously than that. In this particular case, I think running for vice president or being Joe Biden's running mate in this particular case carries with it a lot more weight than it traditionally has in this position. That's for a number of reasons. There's a few realities I think that we have to have about who this vice presidential pick is going to be. We've had a lot of conversations about the effectiveness of our representatives and of our politicians. It oftentimes draws us away from electoral competitions because it just doesn't really apply to us. How does Amy Kloubachar or Joseph Biden or our state reps or our local representatives, how do they represent us? If we can't feel that, then there's no engagement there. And that lack of engagement oftentimes has led to a system that has continually gotten us back into the same cycles of ineffectiveness time and time again. And so the vice president is not going to change the world. The president, we know, is not going to change the world necessarily with the stroke of a pen, although they do have the capability to do so. That's what politics, that's what federal representation typically has looked like. However, we do have a moment in time now that everyone seems to be paying attention to things a little bit deeper than just political posturing, if you will. It should be noted, as I said, this is a very important VP race, considering a few things. First, that 77-year-old Joe Biden will be 78 by the time he is sworn in. I'm speaking it into existence, folks. By the time he is sworn in, he will be 78 years old on January the 20th, 2021. A vice president or a vice presidential nominee may never have a more critical role at the beginning of a presidency than whoever Joe Biden picks. We know that's going to be a woman, could possibly be a woman of color. It's never going to be more important from the jump. 78-year-old Joe Biden is going to be at least 7 years and some change older than the oldest president ever sworn in. No, not Ronald Reagan. It's the president that we currently have right now, Donald J. Trump, who was 70 years old when he was sworn in. He would be 7 years older than that. Just something to consider. It's right. It's going on in the backdrop of what our choices really are. The second thing, I don't know if anyone else has kind of noticed this, but Joe Biden has all but disappeared from the public eye, from the vast public eye, since we were, since that Breakfast Club interview, since he was going on there saying, look, if you ain't black, or I'm sorry, you ain't black if you ain't voting for me. Right. And just that gaffe alone, like it seems like it was weeks ago, but just that gaffe alone sort of was a reminder to a lot of the people who have already agreed that they're going to hold their nose and vote for Biden. You got our vote, right? But it was a reminder that this is going to be really annoying to go through this process. It's going to be really annoying to try and endorse a candidate that seems to have so many public gaffes, so many slips of the tongue, if you will. I mean, how can we confidently make this choice? Every time Joe Biden opens his mouth, every time Joe Biden shows up somewhere, there's a huge chance that Joe Biden is going to say something that's going to make me facepalm, and then have to consult with myself for a few about the choice that I've committed to myself making. I'm going to vote for Joe Biden. How many times did you have to tell yourself that after the Breakfast Club interview? Really wish you wouldn't have said that, but I'm going to vote for Joe Biden. I'm going to vote for Joe Biden. It erodes the confidence that you have behind your voting electorate when you see Joe continually messing up. He's the obvious choice. We know that. But there was an obvious choice 4 years ago, and we somehow messed that up as a country. Not as black folk. We can get into that later. As a country, we certainly bungled that election in 2016. And here we are again in 2020. And I don't think that his strategists and the people that are around him want any sort of disruption on his way to the presidency, because what poll numbers now show us, and I know poll numbers aren't always the most accurate thing in the world, but what poll numbers are telling us right now is that Trump's approval rating nationwide, doesn't matter if you're looking at a Fox News poll, a Rasmussen poll, a Fire poll, a Lightning poll, anything. You look at it 6 different ways to Sunday, Donald Trump is absolutely losing support. And it could be for a number of reasons. We don't exactly know the specific reason at this point, but just kind of pick one at this point. 118,000 dead because of coronavirus, lack of response, proper response to what has been a recent uprising against police killings in this country of African Americans. Those are just kind of the two big ones, but you kind of got a mixed bag there that you can reach into and pull out a reason why people might be less confident in Trump in 2020 than they were in 2016. This gap between the two candidates is widening by the day. It's a part of the reason why, by the way, much like you've seen Joe Biden hiding away, in a sense, some people are saying he's hiding, he's chilling in his basement, staying away from public appearances, that kind of thing. A response to that from the Trump administration has been, first of all, these aggressive commercials. I don't know if you've seen them on TV that kind of are trying to force Joe Biden to respond to some of these wild claims that they're throwing at him. And I think in addition to that, you're seeing him in Tulsa, Oklahoma tomorrow, something that's jacked up for a number of reasons. But you see him in Tulsa, Oklahoma tomorrow, planning to hold a rally with upwards of 20,000 100,000 people showing up inside one arena during coronavirus in a coronavirus hotspot, by the way. We see him planning this because he needs to get Donald Trump in the way that Biden needs to kind of hide right now. Donald Trump needs to be seen. He needs to be out in front of his crazies, his deplorables. Yeah, I can say it. I know I'm not running for president. I can say what they are. They're deplorables. He can get out in front of his deplorables and say, yeah, feel good about being deplorable again. Feel good about just being a gross, awful person like me. That has absolutely been a strength of the Trump administration. Joe, on the other hand, poll numbers show that the less he shows up, the better he does. What I think this means for the vice presidential candidate, first of all, I don't think that this is the kind of thing that will just stop. The effectiveness of him hiding away and staying tucked over in the corner is not something that's just going to stop as a result of the election. It's going to go on beyond November. 77-year-old Joe Biden, soon to be 78-year-old Joe Biden, is going to lean, my estimation, a lot more on his vice president to take over some of these roles that we've traditionally seen the president taking a lead on, if you will. There's a chance that whoever this vice presidential pick is going to be a much more active and much more public face than will Joe Biden during the course of this presidency. That's a very big possibility. And if a black woman ends up being his running mate, then we can experience a sort of uptick, or not an uptick, a sort of promotion of black women in politics in a way that we have quite literally never seen in this country. A black woman will be closer to the presidency than anything that we've seen since Shirley Chisholm in the early 70s. I mean, that's how long it's been since we've gotten a serious candidate there. So whoever this vice presidential pick is going to be crucial just for that aspect. She's going to be, this vice presidential nominee, she's going to be possibly a more significant politician than Joe Biden. Mark it down. I'm telling you. Third thing. If Biden wins, he'll be vying for a re-election at 81 years old. And I don't know if you've ever tossed that kind of phrase around in your brain, but try it. I'm going to vote for an 81-year-old for president this fall, said no one ever, right? Reagan was the oldest president at the time of his election before Trump. He was 69. That would have made him about 73 or so when he was reelected. We've never seen somebody run for president at 80 plus years old. It's almost unheard of, especially the way that our politics is going in these days. It's trending a lot younger. It's trending a lot newer, if you will. And so we haven't really seen someone this old kind of vying for the crown. He's going to be 81 by the time the 2024 election comes back around. So win or lose in this particular election, whoever is selected as as Joe Biden's running mate this time around could be a favorite for president in 2024. There's a good chance that Joe Biden might not even run for re-election in 2024. Actually, it's kind of my hope. That would actually be kind of a cool plan. You know, Joe Biden unseats the crazy dictator or wannabe dictator, you know, from the Oval Office, and then helps usher in the next era of politics. I keep talking about this next era of politics. There's a number of ways it can happen. I don't think that it necessarily has to happen through the presidency, but it can certainly set a tone. It can set a tone for what we actually want to be headed towards instead of politics as usual. This is a huge opportunity. Now, I know I said that 4 years ago. This is a huge opportunity for the Democrats to make an impact here. And they've squandered much of the 3.5 years since that election. But here comes another moment in time that seems to be a little bit more poignant and a little bit more pressing for the times when this can actually happen. 2024 could be a critical year for electoral politics. Hopefully by 2024, we're not doing any of this foolishness anymore. The fourth thing I think to recognize is that Joe Biden's running mate does not have to have a ton of experience. Like we're always looking for these, you know, sort of cookie cutter candidates, in effect that, you know, sort of fit the bill for a lot of these, you know, sort of superficial and stupid things that we want, right? Well, this person has never served as, you know, senator before. This person's never served in a federal office before. This person, you know, we come up with all this stuff that relates back to this concept of electability, which I hate. Can't stand the concept of electability because electability has absolutely nothing to do with someone's ability to do the job as a representative. I don't think that there's a school that can train you for this kind of thing. I don't think that there's a position in government that can better prepare you for being a representative of the people. I just think if you're a good representative of the people, then you are. And if you're not, you're not. Your time served in Congress or in the Senate or in state houses or whatever else like that, I'm not going to say it's insignificant, but I think what it's shown is that people can spend an entire career in politics, an entire career working their way up through the system that we all agreed upon, and they still suck as a candidate or as a person or as a representative or whatever. Being a part of the political establishment now does not guarantee anyone a better job, guarantee them rather of doing a better job once they're in office. And I think that we have to understand it's a part of it's a part of breaking down a system that is very problematic, or is very much so in the way of progress when it comes to politics in this country. We assume that everyone has to have this long resume of experience. Whoever he picks as his running mate does not have to have this experience. I keep seeing people talking about the senator from California, Kamala Harris, who's had obviously plenty of experience as a prosecutor and as a senator herself. She's a black woman. And what oftentimes we do is we do that. We say, well, she's got the check marks, right? Forgetting, by the way, that no one really likes Kamala Harris, especially, I mean, she's not even big in the black community as a person. I'll take her, sure. But we're not really big on her to begin with. And I think her past says more so that she has been tied to the system more so than she has progress. And I think that anyone that you're digging in from the past, Val Deming's name has come up in the same sort of way. Anyone that you're digging back into the past and saying, what is this person's political history and how did they get to this point? You are simply expanding the conversation about electability politics that has no place in representatives that I'm interested in. I don't care how electable you are. How good of a job are you going to do? And certainly I can see that having past political experience does not necessarily make you better at such thing. And also taking into consideration that the president that we currently have, Donald Trump, had 0.00 political experience before assuming the role of president. Zero. He's never a senator, congressman, anything. And as much as I hate to say it, I mean, I don't want to give him praise for this in any sort of way because I don't think it's worthy of praise. But I think him through his selfishness and him through his, sort of demonstrative attitude towards politics effectively destroyed what we know of the Republican Party. No one's focusing. No one talks about that. Donald Trump hasn't done anything to destroy the Democrats. He's done a lot to destroy the country, but he's especially destroyed his own party. Because right now they're kind of backed into a relationship that they don't know how to really get out of. Donald Trump's not going to be president forever. My hope is that it's only going to last another 3.5 months. But at whatever point that Donald Trump is no longer president, the Republicans have got a big decision on their hands. What kind of party are we going to be when the big bully is not sitting in the Oval Office? Because the version of the Republican Party that existed in 2016, still not a great place, still kind of an ugly, meddled place in my opinion. But it is certainly not the version of the Republican Party that we have now in 2020. And the Republicans have to deal with that still, at whatever point that Donald Trump is no longer president. But in effect, somebody who had no political experience was able to capture the minds of an entire political party. And to get those people to not just vote for him, but like vote super hard for him. Wear his gear to rallies, risk killing themselves at certain rallies just to come. That's the cult of personality that somebody with no political experience was able to take over it with the Republican Party. And I'm not saying that we need somebody like that to do the same thing to the Democratic Party, or Democrat Party rather. But I think that the answer to how we get different representation is going to be housed somewhere in this conversation about how someone from outside the system, somebody who hasn't called themselves a part of the system for 20, 30, 40 years, that person is going to be the person, I think, that ultimately upends a lot of the ways that we do business here in American politics. And that can start right here. Joe Biden has already made the commitment to pick a woman as his vice presidential nominee. Great. He has certainly heavily implied that that woman is going to be a black woman even before this Klobuchar announcement as well. I think that's great too. And while a lot of this is going to be smoke and mirrors politics in this particular moment, I do think that it somewhat sets a platform for how we can change moving forward. And some of those implementations will be in place. Not a save-all, not a cure-all. I'm not banking on this idea that if a black woman is elected vice president, that it's suddenly her job to fix everything that's been going on in this country. I think we ask black women to do that enough. Us as black men, we ask them to do that. I think the world asks a lot of black women as well, without giving them their just due. How many times have we been going around on that carousel, right? And so while it might seem like a lot of smoke and mirrors now, it absolutely builds the platform to real effective change. And by the way, the inspirational, sort of feeling of having an African-American woman as vice president, one heartbeat, if you will, away from the presidency, is something that's going to inspire people, I think, especially young black girls across the entire country, in the way that, Barack Obama did for a lot of black folks in 2008. So this is a huge moment. I don't know if the Democrats are going to step up to this moment. I don't know if they're going to meet this moment where it is, but it is certainly politically advantageous for them to do so. I don't like saying that, but it's politically advantageous for them to do so. And some progress, certainly better than the progress that we've experienced in the last 3 years, which has been not a lot. Not a lot. All right. So thanks for listening. I appreciate it. Folks are listening right now on the Facebook and the Instagram. I'm going to get to your questions and your comments now. Make sure if you have any questions or comments, you leave them on the page. Even if you watch this video a little bit later, not watching live, still leave your comment. I would love to hear from you. And a reminder, of course, we are on Mixer. We're on YouTube. We're on Twitter as well. So a bunch of different ways that you can connect with the show and watch it live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I appreciate you all. I appreciate it. All right, let's get to the comments. And here on the Facebook, we do have a few comments here. Leonard Richardson comments in and says she knew she didn't have a chance. She wanted to save face, referring to Amy Klobuchar making this announcement today, of course, that she called the president, or I keep saying that, wishful thinking, right? But she called former Vice President Joe Biden earlier this week and said that she encouraged him, in so many words, to select an African-American woman to be his running mate this fall. I don't believe that she had much of a chance before that, but I think there is something that's important that we ought to recognize about this process, though, that Amy Klobuchar now being pushed out of this particular race is something that hasn't really happened in past races. In 2016, I'm not saying Tim Kaine was the same sort of candidate that Amy Klobuchar would have been, but Tim Kaine, who served as he was the governor, right, of Virginia. He was senator. Senator there in Virginia, was one of these candidates that reminded me a lot of Amy Klobuchar, in that when it was announced that Tim Kaine was going to be Hillary Clinton's running mate, everyone was like, huh? Who? Tim Kaine? Who is this guy? And we all had to kind of scramble to kind of do our Googles about what kind of person that Tim Kaine was. He was very much so unknown. He was very much so a moderate Democrat, somebody that wasn't exactly going to appear as though he was going to push the envelope on very many issues. And it kind of just was a flat sort of ending to Hillary Clinton's run for president. There was nobody progressive. It wasn't a woman, as a lot of people expected. She played it conservative. And I think Klobuchar was in position to be that person next. And I think if it wasn't for some of the voices that have come up and said, look, we don't want her. This is not the time for Klobuchar. I think if it wasn't for that chorus of voices, we very well could have fallen back into that same trap of having a Tim Kaine-like candidate as a running mate leading up to the election in November. So yeah, she wanted to save face. She knew she didn't have a chance, as you said, Leonard. But we were very close as a country to having her as the running mate if it wasn't for this, so this uproar, this unrest, if you will, and sort of exposing parts of her past and her history. But that's what politics is always about, saving face. Can I recover for the next election, whatever election that might be, whether it's my current seat or one that I'm hoping to get in the very near future? Those kinds of things have ruled electoral politics, and that's not the kind of thing that we want. It's not the kind of thing that we want. David McCowan comments in and says, these things are all tactics to get our vote. I do celebrate Juneteenth, but that becoming a national holiday is a political tactic also. Yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that. I think there is an inherent mistrust that I have, and I said this in an earlier show, that I have with a lot of people who are now coming to the fold and saying, hey, especially people that are like all up in your face about it. We're like, hey, I want to let you know that I'm sorry, right? Like, I've made a lot of mistakes and I apologize, right? It's like, what made you apologize in this moment when this has been going on for years and for years and years? I wasn't born this year, right? I didn't just start suffering this year. And so we have to, I think, call into question some of the intent of what some of these folks are in, saying something like, hey, I celebrate Juneteenth, or I want to support those who are celebrating Juneteenth. Is it because you are honest about making a change, or just because, as I said, it becomes politically advantageous for you to do so right now? I think it'll be interesting 1 year from now, June 19th, 2021, when Joe Biden is president, hopefully. I think it'll be an interesting test next year to see how much of this same energy that we're seeing behind this year's Juneteenth celebrations and acknowledgments will be there next year as well. I think that'll make a huge difference. But we will see, David. We will definitely see. Let's see. Let's go down to our next comment. Wahida comments in and says, since COVID really, and then that interview talking about when was the last time we saw Joe Biden. I think that's in reference to. And he has really laid low. And that interview, we talked about that here on this show, but that interview was kind of this moment where it was like, oh no, we need to keep him. We realize that there's not an environment that we can push Joe Biden into that's going to, sort of make him a more appealing candidate. Like, if we've got people who are willing to vote for him, I think at that point, that's the ceiling of what we can get for Joe Biden. The excitement that we can have behind Joe Biden is the idea that he's not Donald Trump. I mean, there's sometimes when there's some very eerie similarities between the two, but he's absolutely not Donald Trump. And we have to vote for him. Like, that moment just made that reality that much more painful. Every single time that he stepped outside of that, it makes that moment more painful for us. And I think what many strategists around him said was, look, let's shut this whole thing down, right? Let's stop encouraging Joe Biden to continue to erode his poll numbers when we have, plenty of evidence that tells us when he's in the House and he's not saying anything, at least on a large public scale, that it's working. It's not the best way to win a presidency. It's certainly backing into the Oval Office, but I'll take it. I will take it. Thank you for the comment. I appreciate it. Dave comments back in and says, now we know what Trump supporters felt like. Yeah. In a sense, I think right now Trump supporters, and I'm not trusting entirely polling data at this point. I'm not relying upon that and saying, oh, Joe Biden, doesn't matter who he picks. It doesn't matter what Joe Biden does between now and November. He should be good. He should be cool come November. I think we've learned from 2016 that those poll numbers cannot always be trusted. So make sure you're getting out and voting. Don't rely upon the strength of the numbers. Vote in something that you believe in. I'm not saying necessarily Joe Biden, but if you believe in the country taking a different direction come November, I don't know what that direction is going to be, but it's a different direction than what we've seen in the last 3 years, then you need to be out there voting. 100%. Thank you for the comment. I appreciate it. Tavon, T keeps it fit. Parker, make sure you go follow him if you want to keep it fit. It's in the name. He says, I got to go follow the new socials. Absolutely. At Keaton D. Nichols is where you can follow me. A. Nichols Worth on Facebook. A. Nichols Worth on Anchor. A. Nichols Worth on Spotify. You can get them all over those places. I appreciate it. Make sure you're following us. You're following us everywhere. Gina Del Rio, my homie Gina, she comments in and says, who is your VP pick? Michelle Obama. That is my VP pick. I love Michelle Obama. I think she's a great person. Obviously, she's kind of been pushed to the edge of contention. We know that she's not going to be running for president or vice president, anything else along those lines. But I think someone along those lines of Michelle Obama, not somebody who has it all and can do it all like an Oprah or Beyonce or something along those lines. But I do think that somebody outside of our political realm is going to be more fitting for this role. And who specifically that is, admittedly, I don't know just yet. I just know that it shouldn't exactly be the people whom we've pushed to the forefront because of their political experience just yet. And we'll see what that looks like. And I'll certainly do my research on that, Gina, and on Monday have a more comprehensive and specific list of maybe some suggestions. Not that he's necessarily going to listen to me, but I certainly think that that's something that we can discuss certainly on this platform as well. So I appreciate the comments. Go over to our Instagram. We did get a comment in here from 81. Intellect comments in. Go follow Intellect too. He's got some great music. He says, this country needs younger leaders. Get these old farts the F out of here. 81. Yes, that's how old Joe Biden will be upon re-election, 81 years old. There's a lot in our country that a lot of our political sort of cultures, I guess, in this country that very much are controlled and run by an older generation of folks. That's obviously going to be changing in the next 10, 15 years or so, but we don't have to wait until that time for that to kind of show up and for that to happen. I think what we've seen with these protests over the last couple of weeks that are still going on, by the way, they're not the main story in the news, but we kind of knew that was going to happen eventually. These protests have kind of shown us that there is a huge contingent of people that are ready to take some kind of action. Even if they were on the fence, they didn't have an understanding as to what their action should have been as an individual, white or black. But we do have a lot of people waking up to the realization that they can no longer sit on the sidelines, that they can no longer wait on America effectively to autocorrect itself. And a lot of those people that are coming to that realization are young people. There's a lot of people coming to the realization that their place in politics is not one to just make comments about things on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and things like that, but they actually have a participation in this. Their vote matters in a way that maybe they didn't think so before, but it actually does matter in a way that could lead them to a better tomorrow. Maybe not right now, but it's certainly going to lead to a better tomorrow if we show up in force, if we show people that we are serious. And I've talked about this before. We don't have the candidate that we want for that big progressive change that we're all pushing for in this moment. That candidate is not going to be on the ticket come November. But one thing that I think that we can agree on is that if we don't participate, then the conversation doesn't even get going. It doesn't even get out of the gates. And that's something that we should all keep in mind, most certainly, as we continue to analyze this presidential race. Thank you for listening, everybody. I appreciate it. You can go follow A. Nichols Worth on all of our platforms. Just search A. Nichols Worth on Facebook, on Spotify, on Anchor, and also on Mixer. If you're a fan of Mixer, if you watch video game streams and things like that, I got a couple of my video game streams up there, but it's going to be mostly for A. Nichols Worth episodes. So just another way that you can enjoy A. Nichols Worth. I hope you all give this a share on your timelines because you never know who else could use this information as well. Shout out to the people on Instagram as well. And Twitter, you can follow me there at Keaton D. Nichols. That's at Keaton D. Nichols. And subscribe to the podcast at anchor.fm/A. Nichols Worth. I will see you all. Have a great weekend. I'll talk to you again on Monday. Don't forget to stay safe out there, and we'll see you on the flip side.